Most men believe regret works like karma, that if you are good enough, she'll eventually feel it. That belief is wrong. When a woman takes a man for granted, she usually feels nothing when the relationship ends. No panic, no loss, no emotional collapse, just relief and distance. And that's not because you didn't matter. It's because regret doesn't form when access still feels available. And most men make sure it does. They reach out, they explain, they try to be seen one last time. What they don't realize is that regret isn't triggered by effort. It's triggered by contrast, by absence, by reality unfolding differently than expected. If you don't understand this, you'll keep confusing indifference with insignificance and punish yourself for the wrong reason. Most men misunderstand what it actually means to be taken for granted. They assume it's about disrespect, cold behavior, or obvious mistreatment. But in most cases, it's far quieter than that. It doesn't arrive as cruelty. It arrives as indifference, subtle, gradual, almost invisible while it's happening. Being taken for granted begins when your presence stops creating an emotional reaction. Early in a relationship, your attention carries weight because it isn't assumed. When you pull back, it's felt. When you lean in, it changes the tone. Your absence creates tension. Your presence creates relief. You matter because you're not guaranteed. Over time, that dynamic can shift. Not because you did something wrong, but because you became predictable. Your availability became consistent. Your effort became reliable. And once something feels guaranteed, the brain stops monitoring it closely. What once stood out emotionally starts blending into the background. This is the part men struggle with. From your perspective, you're doing everything right. You're stable, you're open, you're present, you're showing up the way a good partner should. But when consistency isn't paired with clear standards, the relationship learns a dangerous lesson. Access to you doesn't require effort. When access becomes effortless, attention fades, not out of malice. Not because she suddenly decided you weren't valuable, but because there's no perceived risk of losing you. That's the key distinction most men miss. Being taken for granted does not mean she thinks you have no value. It means she believes you're not going anywhere. And once your presence feels guaranteed, her nervous system stops responding to it. This is why the signs are usually small at first. Replies come slower. Check-ins happen less. She assumes you'll adjust. Problems linger longer because there's no urgency to fix them. The connection doesn't explode. It quietly thins out. And the more available you remain, regardless of how she shows up, the more your presence becomes something she expects instead of something she experiences. From the outside, it looks unfair. You didn't withdraw. You didn't become distant. You didn't stop caring. But emotional impact isn't created by effort alone. It's created by contrast, by the possibility of absence, by knowing something meaningful could actually be lost. When that risk disappears, so does the emotional charge. This is where the real damage happens. Because once access no longer requires effort, the relationship stops reinforcing your value. And without reinforcement, connection weakens, even if affection never fully disappears. Understanding this is critical because it explains not only how men get taken for granted, but why what comes next unfolds the way it does. Most men expect regret to show up immediately after the breakup. They assume that if the relationship mattered, she should feel the loss right away. So when she seems calm, distant, or even relieved, it hits hard, not just emotionally, but psychologically. It creates doubt. It makes you question your value, your impact, and whether the relationship meant anything to her at all. But that expectation is based on a misunderstanding of how women often process emotional separation. For many women, the breakup is not the beginning of the loss, it's the end of it. Long before she says the words out loud, the emotional work has already been happening internally. Weeks, sometimes months before the relationship ends, she's been replaying conversations, tracking patterns, weighing disappointments, processing uncertainty. That internal dialogue doesn't announce itself. It unfolds quietly beneath the surface while the relationship is still technically intact. During this phase, disappointment rarely comes out cleanly. Instead of direct confrontation or immediate departure, it accumulates small moments where she feels unheard, times where expectations go unmet, a growing sense of emotional distance she can't quite articulate. Each instance adds another layer to the decision she's slowly forming. By the time she finally ends the relationship, she's already grieved much of what she's losing. The breakup isn't a shock to her system, it's a conclusion. This is why the aftermath looks so confusing to men. While you're just beginning to process the loss, she appears emotionally steady, sometimes even lighter. Not because she's happy about ending things, but because the tension of indecision has been released. The internal conflict she carried while deciding whether to stay or leave is finally gone. What you're often witnessing isn't indifference, it's relief. Relief from the mental weight of uncertainty. Relief from carrying unspoken disappointment. Relief from being stuck between wanting things to improve and believing they won't. And there's another layer that prevents regret from forming at this stage: access. Immediately after the breakup, her mind doesn't register permanent loss. Even if communication slows or stops, there's often still a sense of control, a belief that she could reach out if she wanted to. That optional access keeps the emotional system from recognizing that something is truly gone. Regret requires distance. It requires contrast. It requires reality to unfold differently than expected. Right after a breakup, none of that exists yet. She hasn't lived without you in a meaningful way. She hasn't compared what she imagined life would be like to what it actually feels like. Without that comparison, there's nothing for regret to attach itself to. This is where men misread the situation. The absence of regret in the beginning doesn't mean you didn't matter. It means her emotional timeline started earlier than yours. And until time, distance, and reality do their work, regret simply has no place to land. There's a psychological rule most men don't understand, and it explains almost everything that happens after a breakup. The human brain cannot regret losing something it still believes it can access. Regret requires finality. It requires the nervous system to register. This is gone. And as long as the mind believes there's a door still open, even slightly, that signal never arrives. Right after a breakup, many women still feel a sense of optional access. Even if communication stops, the assumption often remains: if I wanted to, I could reach out. That belief alone is enough to delay regret. The emotional system doesn't experience loss when it thinks retrieval is possible. This is where men unintentionally sabotage themselves, chasing, checking in, sending emotional messages, trying to explain, trying to prove value, trying to stay present just in case. From a man's perspective, these actions feel logical. They come from fear of loss and a desire to repair, but psychologically, they do the opposite of what he hopes. They confirm access. Every message reinforces the idea that you're still available. Every attempt to reconnect tells her nervous system there's no real distance yet. And without distance, there's no contrast. Without contrast, regret has nothing to attach to. Regret doesn't form because someone realizes you are good. It forms when reality diverges from expectation, when life without you doesn't feel the way it was imagined, when absence creates a noticeable difference. As long as you remain emotionally present, that comparison never happens. This is why men who try to show up better after the breakup often get the coldest response. Not because their effort is wrong, but because effort offered without boundaries increases predictability. It makes you more accessible, not more impactful. The more you try to demonstrate value, the more you remove the very conditions that allow value to be felt. From the outside, her response can look like indifference, a lack of emotion, a lack of care. But that interpretation is misleading. What you're actually seeing is a system that hasn't registered loss yet. Emotion doesn't surge when something fades slowly. It surges when something disappears clearly. As long as her emotional system believes you're still there, still reachable, still responsive, still waiting, there's no urgency, no contrast, no internal reckoning. This is why regret, when it happens at all, comes later. Not during the chaos of the breakup, not while access still feels possible, but after time has passed, after silence has settled, after reality has had a chance to unfold without you in it. Until then, what looks like coldness isn't cruelty. It's the absence of a signal. The loss hasn't landed yet. One of the most painful parts of a breakup for men isn't just the loss itself, it's the timing. Because male regret and female regret operate on completely different clocks. For men, regret usually arrives after the loss. The relationship ends, access is cut, and the routine collapses overnight. That sudden absence creates shock. The mind scrambles to make sense of what just disappeared. Memories resurface, conversations replay. Moments you dismissed suddenly feel heavy. Regret rushes in because the loss is immediate and undeniable. For many men, this is the first moment they slow down enough to reflect. While the relationship was active, attention was placed on maintaining stability, avoiding conflict, or assuming things would work themselves out. Once it's over, everything that was postponed comes flooding back at once. Male regret tends to center on inaction. What you didn't say, what you didn't set boundaries around, where you stayed quiet instead of leading. And because the relationship is now over, those missed moments feel final. There's no opportunity to correct them. That finality intensifies the regret. Women, on the other hand, often experience regret, if it comes at all, after evaluation, not after loss. Their emotional processing typically happens while the relationship is still intact. The questioning, the disappointment, the internal weighing of options. By the time the breakup happens, much of the emotional turbulence has already been absorbed. What follows isn't collapse, it's stabilization. This creates a brutal mismatch. At the exact moment a man is just beginning to feel the full weight of the loss, the woman has already moved through the most emotionally demanding phase. One side is waking up to absence. The other has already adjusted to it. From the man's perspective, this feels deeply personal. It looks like indifference, like the relationship mattered more to him than it ever did to her. But that conclusion misses the underlying reality. This isn't about who cared more. It's about when the emotional bill came due. Men tend to process regret reactively after something is gone. Women tend to process it proactively while deciding whether to leave. The difference in timing creates the illusion of imbalance even when emotional investment was real on both sides. Understanding this doesn't erase the pain, but it removes the false story that you were insignificant. The timeline wasn't a judgment of your value. It was a difference in emotional sequencing. One of the most dangerous assumptions men make after a breakup is believing that regret automatically leads to return. It feels logical. If someone realizes they made a mistake, they should correct it. If she regrets losing you, she should come back. But regret and reconciliation are not the same process. They don't follow the same rules, and they don't require the same conditions. A woman can regret misjudging a man and still decide not to re enter the relationship. The first reason is identity protection. Coming back isn't just an emotional decision, it's a public one. It requires admitting not only internally but outwardly that her previous judgment may have been wrong. For many women, that threatens how they see themselves. It challenges their belief in their intuition, their emotional intelligence, their ability to read people. Protecting that identity can feel more important than reopening a connection, even if regret exists. Then there's pride and social accountability. Relationships don't exist in isolation. Friends, family, and peers often know about the breakup. They may have supported the decision. Returning can feel like moving backward instead of forward. It can feel like losing face. Even quiet regret can be outweighed by the pressure to appear consistent, decisive, and emotionally resolved. Another powerful barrier is the fear of being wrong twice. Regret might acknowledge that something valuable was lost, but returning carries risk. What if the same problems resurface? What if the relationship fails again? The emotional cost of repeating the pain can feel heavier than the cost of living with regret. In that case, regret becomes a warning instead of a motivator. Timing matters too. Regret often appears after emotional momentum has already moved on. By the time clarity arrives, routines have changed, new identities have formed, life without the relationship has stabilized. Even if she recognizes the loss more clearly, she may no longer feel emotionally equipped to re engage. There's also an important distinction most men miss. Not all regret is the same. Some women don't regret the relationship ending. They regret how it ended, or how the man was evaluated, or the assumptions they made along the way. This kind of regret doesn't create desire to reconnect. It creates insight. It becomes a quiet correction to future choices, not an invitation to revisit the past. This is where men get stuck. They interpret regret as a sign, a signal, a countdown. They wait for it to turn into action. But regret can exist privately without ever becoming pursuit. And when a man ties his sense of worth to whether regret turns into return, he hands over control of his emotional state to an outcome he can't influence. The hard truth is this: regret doesn't define your value, and it doesn't guarantee reconciliation. Sometimes the most accurate outcome of regret isn't reunion, it's growth. Not just for her, but for you. Understanding this isn't about becoming cynical. It's about removing false hope. Because when hope is built on misunderstanding, it keeps men stuck in place, waiting for something that was never promised. And waiting is the very posture that allowed you to be taken for granted in the first place. After being taken for granted, the most dangerous move a man can make is reacting emotionally in an attempt to restore his value. That reaction often feels justified. You feel overlooked, dismissed, or replaced, and the instinct is to do something, to fix it, confront it, or withdraw dramatically. Most men fall into one of two extremes. The first is chasing. More effort, more explanations, more availability, trying to show her what she lost, trying to prove value after the fact. The second is shutting down completely, going cold, cutting off emotionally in a way that's fueled more by hurt than clarity. Both responses come from the same place, the need to be validated. And both quietly reinforce the same dynamic that allowed you to be taken for granted in the first place. Moving forward correctly doesn't start with punishment or performance. It starts with restraint. Not silence as a tactic, but space as a reset. Space removes the assumption of guaranteed access. It allows emotional systems to recalibrate. It gives your presence room to be felt again instead of expected. This isn't about disappearing to provoke a reaction. It's about refusing to keep offering access that isn't being met with equal investment. The next shift is reclaiming standards, quietly. Most men announce boundaries after they've already been taken for granted. They explain them, justify them, argue for them. That usually backfires. Standards aren't speeches, they're filters. Behavior determines access. If effort drops, availability adjusts. If respect fades, engagement decreases. No confrontation required. No emotional correction. Calm consistency is far more powerful than reactive intensity. Then comes the most important shift of all, moving from outcome focused thinking to identity focused thinking. After a breakup, men often fixate on whether she'll regret it, whether she'll reach out, whether she'll finally see his value. That keeps his sense of worth tied to her future reaction. It puts his stability on hold. Moving correctly means asking a different question. Not will she recognize my value, but am I living in a way that reflects it? That requires honesty. Looking at where you overextended, where you avoided discomfort, where you stayed agreeable instead of leading. Not to blame yourself, but to understand what you trained the relationship to expect. Finally, a man moves forward by refusing to wait. Waiting for regret, waiting for closure, waiting for validation. All of it keeps you emotionally anchored to the same dynamic that diminished you. Forward motion doesn't require anger or bitterness. It requires direction. Investing energy into purpose, discipline, relationships that respond to effort. Building a life that isn't paused while someone else decides how they feel. The strongest position a man can take after being taken for granted isn't dominance. It isn't indifference. It's calm self-respect. No chasing, no proving, no waiting, just quiet alignment between who you are and how you show up. That's the position from which no one learns to treat your presence as guaranteed. Again, being taken for granted doesn't mean you were weak, and it doesn't mean you lacked value. It means a dynamic slipped out of balance slowly, quietly, while you kept showing up the same way. Your presence became reliable, predictable, and emotionally safe, and when that happened, it stopped being felt. That's the part most men miss. Regret, if it ever comes, is not something you can force. It doesn't respond to pain. It doesn't respond to explanations. It doesn't respond to proving how good you were. Regret only forms when reality creates distance, contrast, and a clear sense of loss. And even then, regret is not a verdict on your worth. It's not a scoreboard. It's not justice. And it's not a promise of return. Your value isn't defined by whether someone eventually realizes what they lost. It's defined by what you do once you understand the pattern that allowed you to be taken for granted in the first place. That's where real power lives. Not in waiting, not in hoping, not in needing validation from someone who already learned how to treat your presence as guaranteed. Real strength is quiet. It's grounded. It's standards without speeches, direction without hostility, self-respect without performance. When you stop measuring yourself by her future regret, you start realigning with your own identity. And men who move from that place don't chase closure. They don't bargain for recognition. They don't pause their lives waiting to be chosen again. They move forward cleanly. If this video gave you clarity instead of comfort, take a moment to subscribe. This channel is for men who want to understand emotional dynamics without lying to themselves. And if you've ever been taken for granted, leave a comment, not to vent, but to reflect. Share this with a man who's stuck asking the wrong question. Because the question isn't whether she'll regret losing you, it's whether you'll ever allow your value to be treated as optional again.